Thank you very much, Paul, Betty. Let me just remind Paul that I do not threaten. I only make promises. And as a good politician, the promises that I make are ones that I keep, unlike others with whom you've had to deal with recently. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first and foremost thank the Barbados Chamber of Commerce for doing me the favor of allowing me to meet with you in a formal setting. I meet with many of you informally. I meet with many of you one-on-one. But it is good to be able to have the structure of a meeting, and it is even better to be able to do it in November, the anniversary of our nation's formation. Forgive me if I also extend a very special welcome to my colleagues, because I am very cognizant that this is not a journey that I can make on my own, but we're equally cognizant that this is not a journey that the 30 of us can make on our own either. And I have a speech, but I'll tear this speech up today, because this morning when I woke up, having written this speech, I determined, having read the speech that I delivered to you in 2010, the speech that I delivered in 2013, the speech that I delivered in 2014, the conversation that I remembered that we had in 2015, and the speech that I delivered to you last year on rebranding Barbados with the 5 platforms of immediate action that we would do differently. The new fiscal governance, the new governance and the rooting out of corruption, the making business easier in Barbados, not just for businessmen, but citizens, strengthening institutions in this country that have been gutted from the law courts to the social partnership, right back through to the police force, to the immigration department. And finally, dealing with a new set of productive sectors that will drive growth, because without growth, this mission means nothing. Having read those speeches again, I asked myself, what is the tolerance level of people to hear the same thing over and over and over? What is it? And where do we find ourselves now? The truth is that the answer is blowing in the wind. The answer is before us. You know it, and I know it. All of us know it. Paul may not want to say it publicly given his introduction today, because there is a Barbadian way that is so attached to fairness that the only way I can address this issue is to ask you to recall the conversation that Christiane Amanpour has had to have with the people of the world since the November election in 2016. And what is it that she said? That people get confused between being neutral and telling the truth. People get confused between being neutral and telling the truth. And that if we are to be neutral at all times, then evil will predominate, as it has done in so many war-torn areas of the world. How many times are we going to reflect on the fact that we have a government that is comfortable with Barbados being 175th out of 197 countries in the world with respect to economic growth this year, when growth is our major challenge? How many times are we going to be comfortable with a government being, or satisfied with a government being comfortable with foreign reserves that didn't start to drop today, or last year, or even 2013? I read the 2009 budget reply that I did yesterday as well. And in that reply, we reflected on the fact that the reserves dropped $450 million between 2008 and 2009. How many times are we going to be satisfied with hearing that we have to facilitate business in this country? But yet this year, the doing business report comes out and Barbados drops another 15 points. How many times? How many times can we accept that a country that is known for regularity of data and its governance, punching above its weight, could now be reflected in the Global Competitiveness Survey as simply not doing what it had to do to submit the data so that we could even be considered for a ranking this year, having dropped from number 55 to number 72 in the previous year? How many times can we take this? It is like being in a bad nightmare. It is like being punch drunk. Not that I drink too much. How many times? The reality is that we are at a juncture where on the 5th of March, the Parliament will dissolve. And there are too many Bajans who are still asking the question, can we really get out of this? Can we really turn the corner? Can we really make it? Well, when I decided not to use my speech today, I came here only with 5 words in my head, as God is my witness. 5 words. We can and we shall. We can and we shall. You know, the first thing that we need to do is to understand, in recognizing that we can and we shall, that the current trajectory, the current downward spiral, the current mix of policies and mix of individuals has done nothing than to put us in a worse position year by year by year by year. And I ask you to reflect on, if you could not get the job done in 10 years, how are you going to get it done in 15? If you couldn't get the job done in 10 years, how are you going to get it done in 15? And part of the difficulty is that we have, it's a good thing, but it is a constraining factor. We are so wanting to be neutral and fair that we have allowed things to pass in this country that if we had nipped them in the bud each time, we would not be here. How does a police force, who is accountable to a governor general, become the subject of the most rabid partisan political considerations? And it's not a rumor, because it's before the law courts. How do people drive vehicles that belong to companies that are doing business with their ministries? And it is raised 3 years ago, and we turn our head and we do nothing or say nothing about it. And those vehicles are vehicles that I couldn't even buy easily where I stand now, as a BMW X5. How much does a BMW X5 cost? I don't know who are the car dealers in here. How do we say nothing when you change the law to appoint a Chief Justice? How do we say nothing when in 2013 November I came on this spot, in this room? The platform was in the middle there where the lady now is standing in orange. And I asked you to look at the Central Bank Act and to look at the fact that the excessive printing of money, which at that time was only $370 million, not the $1.8 billion that it is now, whether the Section 48 of the Central Bank Act was not being breached because the extent of the excessive credit creation was putting our currency, our monetary stability under pressure, to be more precise. and that the government needed to come to Parliament and to speak to the country and to change the law, as is the case in Jamaica. The overdraft is governed by legislation, but the printing of money and the excess credit creation is not. There are two sections of the Central Bank Act. One that deals at Section 25 or 26 with foreign reserves, which are low, which requires the bank to write the Minister of Finance, and the other one at Section 48, I believe it is, which requires the Minister to be written also by the Central Bank when they believe that there's excessive credit creation or that monetary stability is threatened. And 4 years ago, we discussed this in this room, only to see it mushroom from 370 million to today 1.8 billion. And I'm not talking about National Insurance Scheme holdings, because their holdings of government paper have gone from 1.4 billion to 3.9 billion in the same period of time that this government has been in office. Now I ask you these questions because if you don't understand that this trajectory with this cast of characters cannot carry us any further, then the only people we will have to blame hereinafter in 2018 is not the people who have put us here, but the people who are allowing them who put us here to remain here. So that's the first thing to being able to turn around this country. Regrettably, when we start the process, it's not going to be easy. And we know that, because we've gone so far down into the hole that not only will we require great discipline, not only will we require the ability to think outside of the box and to do things that we've never really done before, particularly in creating the environment for growth through non-fiscal triggers, as I discussed with you at length last year, because we don't only have to tax and spend to trigger growth. How we legislate, how we facilitate, how we regulate, all of these things trigger growth. And I gave you the example, and repeat it now simply, of reverse mortgages. There's a level of genteel poverty that has taken root in this country, particularly among pensioners who are unable to fix a leaking roof, or steps that have tiles coming up, or banisters that need fixing. If you create the legislative framework and the regulatory framework for reverse mortgages, within no time at all, we will unlock $30–40 million in spending in this country by people who know that they have been unable to fix their houses for the last 6, 7, 8 years because they simply have been unable to afford it. And in the simple act of the passage of legislation, not the voting of money and the spending of money, in that simple act, we will unlock capital spending in the private sector in this country. Similarly, I am not worried about the things that we have to do locally, because however difficult the conversation is, we can do it. What I am worried about is Irma and Maria. What I am worried about is earthquakes. Because however strong we are, we can't fight that battle. And in order for us to make sure that we defy what is coming our way, we are going to pay for a disaster in this country either before or after. The odds are not with us. Every 70 to 80 years, Barbados is challenged by a system that is completely destabilizing. Anybody who is a student of the Anglican Church will tell you what happened to the St. Michael's Cathedral in the 19th century. I don't need to tell many of you what happened in Janet. In fact, part of the difficulty is as a consequence of Hurricane Janet. Because we built a number of flat roofs in this country, because there was a shortage of carpenters, and I am told by those older than I am, that Barbados developed a category of worker called a storm carpenter, a man who was not particularly versed in the skill of carpentry, but who could manage to put a roof together still in spite of everything else. And what ought to have been a temporary fix has become the standard for our housing in this country. And I fear what would happen to our housing stock in Barbados. Now, why is this important? When a government can arbitrarily and wantonly concentrate on all kinds of things that create legal liabilities for all kinds of projects that have no major relevance to this country's stability, then you get worried. What are the priorities in Barbados? The ability for us to be resilient and to adapt to climate change. The ability for us to manage our water resources. The ability for us to stabilize the Scotland district that is eroding at a level and a pace that is extremely worrisome. These are the priorities that nobody else has a responsibility to do other than the state. And what we have is misguided priorities confusing themselves for the policies of a government. I say to you that if we were to start to use the other powers that a government genuinely has, and it's not rocket science. At the annual conference, I outlined the first working day of a Barbados Labour Party parliament with the order paper. I can do it because I know what it is to have been in government for over and public life for 28 years. I know how the system works. I know that once a bill is drafted and it is signed off by the Attorney General as fit for submission to Cabinet, that it comes to Cabinet for Cabinet to determine. And once Cabinet accepts, amends, or otherwise deals with it, it is then sent to Parliament. And the Attorney General once again has to submit that it is fit for certification. It is certified as being fit for submission to Parliament. We didn't wait and have not waited until an election process is over to tell you how serious we are about rooting out corruption when I spoke to you last year. We've produced an Integrity Commission bill, and I want to thank the persons who helped us in this effort: Mr. David Simmons, Mr. Leslie Haynes, Mr. Stuart Mottley, Gregory Nichols. But in particular, I also want to thank the lawyers of the Barbados Labour Party, led by Dale Marshall and Wilfred Abrams and Eddie Hinkson, Kerry Simmons, Ralph Thorne, who did what most people don't normally do: roll up their sleeves. Don't wait for a consultant, and let's get this thing right. And let's make sure that that which we have drafted matches the policy framework that we need. We wouldn't be joking. We're not. And I thank Wilfred for explaining it on the call-in program on Monday, and Dale for explaining it to the country on Saturday. Because in that bill, if you go through it, and I've written the social partners, and therefore a copy should come to your organization shortly with asking you to comment on it, it goes right down to the receipt of gifts. It goes to the issue of whistleblowers, which is a critical issue in a small society, and how you protect those who know that something fundamentally wrong is going on, but who do not know how to be able to stop it because there is no protection for them. Similarly, we've committed on that first day to the repealing of the National Social Responsibility Levy. And there are those who get worried. Well, the reality is that Barbados has to restructure its tax system. But separate from that, a tax that no three people in this room can interpret properly for me how it is to be applied cannot be a good tax. Find me three people in this room now who can say the same thing. Taxation must be certain, it must be transparent, and it must be fair. And the problem is that this government, in its failure to confront the realities of our circumstances, have literally pulled for anything that can give them cover. In the same way that all of them want to run to St. John for high ground now for cover, they wanted cover in relation to how they treat the economic policy in Barbados. And I say to you that it is time the people and the businesses of Barbados stop being the guinea pigs for people who have literally failed in every single respect. I challenge you to write down every single tax initiative announced by this government since 2008. You remember there was to be a cell phone tax in 2008? You remember that? Do you remember that there was to be a tax on gaming machines that is still not being paid in this country? Do you remember that there was to be a levy that was attached to the environment in relation to being able to pay for garbage on the NIS? I can go on and on and on. But what is the problem is that in the same way that they come up with these plans, there's no consultation. There's not even a listening to the public servants. And what has happened is that we have become the guinea pigs for the people who are trying to play catch up and to play a form of economic cosmetics and political cosmetics, because it doesn't matter what the substance is. It is only important how it going to look, how it going to sound. We have come equally to recognize that there are powers not just of legislation that can trigger growth in this country. And we said then that policy also triggers growth. An economy grows when businesses expand or new businesses are created. An economy grows when new people are added to the labor force. And we can determine whether we're going to add those people to the labor force at $1,200 a month, doing menial tasks, at $2,500 a month, at $5,000 a month, at $8,000 or $10,000 a month. And the reason why I'm asking you to focus on this is because education for us is much more than just a means of social empowerment and social mobility. The level of education that we give our people will determine the quality of the workforce and hence the quality of production that we can have in this country. But we seem to have gotten mixed up. And all of a sudden, a government that does not know how to get from Bridgetown to Oistins wants to tell you they can't afford to pay for education, and everybody suddenly believes them. Government is about choices. And what are the two things for which we are most competitive in the world, irrespective of the fact that there's no rating this year? Go back and look at it. We are most competitive in education, and we are most competitive in healthcare, the provision of healthcare. And in those two instances, they're not just social sectors, but they are investments. They're investments with respect to medical tourism. They're investments with respect to senior citizens' villages. They're investments with respect to the provision of nursing care. They're investments with respect to the provision of training if we get to establish our International College of Nursing. And nursing is not going to be replaced by artificial intelligence and a robot, because the very nature of nursing requires human empathy and human care. We have to start making serious decisions about whether what we are teaching at the Polytechnic will be superfluous because technology is going to make those tasks irrelevant. When I became Minister of Education, most cars in Barbados did not have computers in them. When I approached the private sector and asked them to help us build out the Autotronics lab in 1997, the private sector regrettably said no. Can you find a car in this country now that doesn't have computers in it? What are the new industries that we're going to force research and development? I had the good fortune of touring with some of my members a biotechnology facility in this country, driven by young Barbadians, doing serious research and development, risking their own money to do it, and coming up with solutions that are not only suitable for this country, but combined with industrial designs suitable for the global community. How many of us realize that the advent of technology is going to make a lot of the things for which we are comfortable irrelevant? When 2 years ago I said that we want to set ourselves a target that Barbados must be a fossil fuel-free society by 2030, I was not aware then of the quickening pace of self-driving cars, or the quickening reduction of costs in batteries. I say all of this to make one simple point. What you need is a government that is fit for purpose in this country. There is nothing so wrong with Barbados that cannot be fixed by a strong dose of leadership. And there's a cloud over this country that causes me sometimes to get worried, because I begin to believe that the biggest crime of the Democratic Labour Party government is robbing the spirit and the belief in oneself of the people in this country. This is a country that has produced some extraordinary people. And I'm not talking only about the scientists and those who would have been at the head of their time in cane breeding in the 19th century. I'm talking about ordinary Bajans. I use a metaphor of a lady who was born on the 1st of May, 1923. And forgive me, she was a strong member of the Barbados Labour Party. She was born on May Day. She was Labour by birth and Labour by choice. Her name was Eldine Boyce. Some in this room may know her. She was an extraordinary woman who had to face all of the odds coming up in the 1930s and 40s, of all the tribulations that so many of our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and great aunts and great uncles had to face. But you know what? They did it. And they exhibited a resilience and went through a world war and went through riots. For them, a free education or access to health care or social security would never go out of style, because they knew what it was not to have it. And they knew the difference that it made to the quality of life and the stability that we take for granted on 166 square miles. Barbados has one asset, and it's called stability. And the day that we lose it, you can kiss everything goodbye. And that's what makes this government criminal in its conduct. Because if you get public health wrong, you're in trouble. And if you get crime and security wrong, you're in trouble. I'm not worried about bringing back this economy. It's going to be difficult, but we can and we shall. And we've given you so many different ideas in the last few years. We can print them again for you, and a manifesto will come. But above all else, what we have given you is the covenant of hope. Now, why is that important? Because you must know and be able to place a reasonable bet as to how your government will act in any given situation. You must not be shocked as to how we will treat to the issue of renewable energy. You must not wonder, how does a government with any sense go and sign $4.7 billion in commitments for a power purchase agreement over 30 years? Where are you going to get that money from? But if you understand the principles outlined in the covenant of hope and the values that it underpins, then you will understand, well, this is a government that is likely to look for forms of investment that make sense, that will have the capacity to utilize Barbadian creativity and ingenuity, that has minimal drain on foreign exchange, hence photovoltaics or biotechnology, and that will not be repatriating dividends to people when we have surplus liquidity in the system, that if you have the appropriate financial instruments, people can have access to finance in this country without having to go begging and then to repatriate dividends overseas for raw materials that are totally, totally Barbadian and not imported. I ask you to reflect on these matters, because when you ask me how can we get out of it, the first thing we do, and I've committed already, that the Barbados Labour Party government will bring to you within 6 weeks, the basic framework for economic stabilization and growth. We have been working for more than 15 months now in a serious way. We've had a number of sectoral consultations in the last 2 months and are continuing. We've met with people from the healthcare sector, from the education, international business, tourism, small business. We have still to do a few more. But how we start is how we will finish. And I say that to let you know that it is not only important what we do, but how we do it. This government has produced a number of plans. The last one, perhaps, is the most involvement that you all have had any involvement in or participation in. And even then, God knows how much that truly has been, because it has been done at the level of public servants without the involvement of the policy directorate in it. If we are serious about turning this country around, the first thing that is required, as I said to you last year, is a commitment to have serious engagement of the social partnership on an ongoing and regular basis. Because there has been a destruction of trust in this country, it means that we're going to have to agree to rebuild trust. And how do we rebuild trust? I believe that a restructured social partnership that allows us to be able to have some level of shared governance and oversight over some key indices, such that if we say we are going to do X, there is evidence of us doing X, and that there is that communication not just from the government of the country, but the social partnership, reflecting that there is authenticity and truth in what we are saying that we are doing, rather than the kind of charades that have paraded itself for reports in this country. We also believe that the social partnership should have a dedicated wing that treats to social justice, because there can be no ability to get through the next few years without ensuring that we take care of those who are most vulnerable, and to ensure that at all stages in this country that there is fairness and social justice obtaining in everything that we do. That is the difference between the private sphere and the public sphere. In the private sphere, it is desirable. In the public sphere, it is obligatory. Fairness and transparency and accountability. And I ask you, therefore, to reflect on these things, because we all know the policies that can be put in place. We've discussed them over and over and over. We've said to you that the burden of adjustment must be fair and shared. We've said to you that we can no longer use our national insurance fund like a piggy bank for a profligate and reckless government. We've said to you that we have to stop printing money. We've said to you that we need to grow the sectors and to bring about a level of investment, but that we need to do so in a way that does not make Barbadians tenants in their own country, but masters of their own fate. And if we were to do all of this just to make us tenants, then count me out. Find somebody else. But if we're going to do all of this to allow each and every one of you who call this country home to be able to share not just in the burden of adjustment, but in the bounty that follows from prosperity and growth, then count us in. And if you can do it with us, and you can walk that road with us, and if you can believe that we can and we shall in the way that I stand fervently before you today to give you that commitment, then I say to you that this moment in time will cause me to reflect on Charles Dickens's novel, and forgive me for adaptation, that we stand on the cusp of what is not a tale of two cities, but a tale of 2 decades. That it was the worst of times, and that it was the best of times. The last decade of our life has left us with an economy smaller than the one that we started the decade with. The last decade of our country's history has left each and every Barbadian, according to Ryan's research, $20,000 poorer than they were at the beginning of the decade. The last decade of our life has seen us end up with crime at higher levels, with social implosion, and with all of the indices going in the wrong way. I believe that next Thursday, which is the 30th of November, and which represents the first day of this nation's next 50 years, can become to be remembered as the start of a decade that will secure the next 50. For if we secure the next 50, then in cricketing terms, we shall reach a century not out. But if we get the next decade wrong, and if we perpetuate it being the worst of times, then I fear for our nation. I believe it can be the best of times. And we can, and we shall make it so. Not because the Labour Party has 30 of the brightest people in the country. We don't. Not because we have the only people that care. We don't. But because the combination of caring and commitment and capacity finds itself in these 30 only to be a representative sample of those thousands who care in this country, and those thousands who are committed, and those thousands who are capable but who have not been asked to do anything. I believe that the combination of the two shall make the difference, such that on this moment we can reflect and say it truly was the worst of times and the best of times. We can and we shall. The only question for you is, will you, can you, and must you? As always, it is about choices, and the choice is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Opposition Leader Ms. Amor Mottley. We can and we shall. A couple of comments from the Opposition Leader. Economic growth, foreign reserves falling,